to this session about how to silence your stakeholders and make them talk when you need them to. I'm your presenter, Pamela Paterson. I have a background in journalism, chemistry, and engineering. I taught college for many years in project management. I also have a new book coming out in early 2025 about interviewing stakeholders, published by the International Institute of Business Analysis. Navigating stakeholder communication is a critical skill in IT, yet it often feels like walking a tightrope. Striking that perfect balance between encouraging stakeholders to share their insights when needed and ensuring they don't overwhelm the process at other times is a nuanced challenge. Two polar opposites of the same problem. There might be some logical reasons why stakeholders don't talk enough or don't talk too much. Honestly, right? They're just trying to do their job in the best way possible. So there might be communication differences, cultural differences, emotional reasons, nervousness, intimidated, personality reasons, even having a bad day. Whatever the reason, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we manage these stakeholders in our meetings and get the information we need. Regardless of the reason, there's a lot that you can do. Let's dive into it. The question is, what can we do? Because we need information from our stakeholders, but we're always running out of time. We need to manage different personalities in our meetings. We are faced with the pressures of deadlines all the time. So what can we do? I'm going to show you 5 different ways to manage stakeholders. The first one is to set the mood and the tone. If you're going to have, say, a long, casual conversation or a short, fast meeting, set the tone. Use word cues and tone of voice. Take a look at this. Suppose I say, we have a lot to go through today, so let's get started. Notice how fast I'm speaking, with deliberation. I have a lot of intent. And now, listen to this one. We're going to start this topic, have some preliminary discussions, and we'll likely have a few more meetings in the future. So do you see how the different tone and the word cues give meaning, give structure? They set the tone and for how the stakeholders think about how they're going to participate. So using these word cues and tone of voice helps to set expectations for your stakeholders in advance. We set the tone. So we need to be mindful of ourselves and how we appear to other people, open, smiling, engaging. If you walked into the room and saw this face, this fellow, you'd have a different tone, mood, and mindset than if you saw this group of people. Their mood and tone and likely associated words creates trust and openness. Stakeholders would feel comfortable to talk about their needs with them. We set the tone. The next one is about structure smartly. This is about structuring our communication to our stakeholders to verbally and visually guide them in the direction that we want. Part of the reason stakeholders don't talk enough or talk too much is that meetings are not structured. Let's take a look at this. For example, we can do a basic agenda that just has the high-level items, like this one: introduction, business needs, functional requirements, and wrap-up. This is the beginning of some structure to help guide the stakeholders to think about what we're going to discuss. Or if we think we might run out of time, or we know we have a lot of people who talk a lot in the meeting and we don't have time for it, we can do a time-boxed agenda where we time each agenda item, and it's very clear. This allows stakeholders to know that we don't have 2 hours to discuss business needs, and they can prepare for that mentally. It shapes how they think about the content and discussion. We can also add names to the agenda items. Who will be responsible for talking about that item? Adding the name to the agenda provides even further structure. When you also send the agenda in advance, your stakeholders can definitively prepare for their items in advance. So even before the meeting begins, your meeting is off to a good start. The other advantage to providing an agenda like this one is for all of the multitaskers, and that's all of us. So they know when they need to insert themselves into the discussion. They'll get ready. You can also add detail to each agenda item. This forms constraints around the conversation. So in the introduction, we wouldn't have known what was included in the introduction. But now we know it's the name, the role, and the department. That's it. Not thoughts about the project, not if we like it, not if we like soccer, no icebreakers. That's it. So it helps to keep the conversation and us on track. With business needs, we know we're creating business needs for accounting, logistics, and leadership. No other departments. So the conversation won't be derailed into other departments because it's very clear. And now functional requirements, we know it's only for the accounting area, not even logistics and leadership. So the meeting will not get derailed into talking about other items. For the wrap-up, it could be interpreted differently, but because it is specified, we know it's about the conclusion and the next steps, and Lucas is handling it. It's not just a summary, it's about the next steps. So people won't ask about the next steps in the different part of the meeting and derail your meeting. So these different kinds of styles of agenda creates a different mood and tone in the meeting. The more specific you get, like this one, the more it creates constraints over the freedom of discussion. Sometimes you want this, like when you have meetings that get derailed and go down that rabbit hole. Other times, you do want a looser agenda that is more organic and freeform. For example, when you're meeting stakeholders for the first time or trying to develop a relationship, you don't want your meeting to be time-boxed or so constrained because it impacts the flow of the meeting and to naturally grow that relationship. You can't really develop a relationship on a stopwatch. So think about what is the purpose of your meeting? Structure it decisively based on your objectives and your stakeholder needs. Now I'm going to talk about structure in terms of requirements. It's one of the basis things that we do in IT. I'm going to read it first and then talk about it. So this is a change for a functional requirement. Right now, users can register for the lottery app using email and password, but in the future, we want users to be able to register using email and password and also with biometric authentication, fingerprint or facial recognition for added security. There's nothing wrong with this requirement, or, it's actually a change, but you have to read every single word to understand it. That's the problem with it. What if we could create a structure where we could remove words, speed up the reading, and increase comprehension, thus reducing the risk in the process, reducing the risk of misunderstanding, of reducing the risk of missing gaps in the logic and the requirement because there's too many words squished together and people don't like to read anyway. We know this. People don't like to read. So the less you make them read, the more productive results you're going to get in the end. What if there was an easy way to do that? You can do it through structure. Take a look at the requirement now. The only thing I did was separate it into current state and future state. Notice that it's easier to read. Let's take it one step further. Now, with the crossed out words, I removed words that I don't need, that don't affect the meaning. It doesn't matter if I say right now. It doesn't affect the requirement. It doesn't matter if I remove the words for the lottery app, because all of the requirements are for the lottery app. So let's remove that. I removed, but in the future we don't have to have that because we have the column that says future state. We don't have to repeat the last requirement, email and password, because it's right beside it. And the end, for added security, we don't need that. We don't need to explain the why. We just need to explain the what. So now you have a requirement that looks like this. Current state, users shall register using email and password. Future state, users shall also register using biometric authentication, fingerprint, or facial recognition. Easy to read and understand. When something is easy and fast to understand, we have increased our ability to understand and be understood. We have also shortened the entire end-to-end information lifecycle, which over time could literally save us thousands of hours. I mean, think about it. If you have a team of 10 reviewers, you have 1,000 requirements over a year, and you're able to save them a few minutes reviewing each requirement, you can literally save thousands of hours on your projects over time. So if you're looking for a way to direct stakeholder input better and manage those stakeholder conversations, think about structure. Okay, next one, number 3, is be visual. How do stakeholders absorb information from you? We learn different ways, and I have over 13 years of teaching in college project management. I've experienced this firsthand. Some people learn by listening, by talking. Other people learn by seeing something visually, by reading. Other people learn by doing. These are the kinesthetics, the mechanics, the brilliant with their hands, spatial abilities. There are other ways to learn. And your stakeholders could be strong in one area and weak in another. Why does this matter to you? It matters because if your stakeholders absorb information visually, but all you do is talk in your meetings 100% without any PowerPoint or something to look at, they might absorb very little of what you say. Like me, I'm a visual. So why does this matter? Because if you ask them to do a task, they might not fully absorb what you're saying in the first place and do it the wrong way or not at all. This costs you time, and it causes confusion and introduces risk into the process because they didn't fully understand. So what can we do about this? Use visual and verbal communication for everything that you do. Whenever you have a meeting, have verbal and visual together. We always have verbal anyway in a meeting. So now just add some visuals. And it doesn't address the kinesthetic, the small amount of green in the picture, about 5%, but verbal and visual together catches the majority of stakeholders, how they absorb information. And visual can be anything, literally. It can be process maps. It can be you sharing your screen and showing requirements in Excel and DevOps. It can even be showing your notes on the screen. I do this quite often, actually. I've worked for over 60 companies, and I've had the chance to collect the best practices from all of these companies in terms of interacting with stakeholders. And if I have nothing else to show stakeholders, I will show them my notes on the screen. It keeps them engaged. It keeps them focused. It appeals to the verbal and the visual way of absorbing information. It gives them something for their eyes to do. They can also see, by watching you take notes, they can see if you've caught up to them verbally. So if they are talking too fast or too much, this is a nonverbal way of managing the pace and flow of conversation. So be visual. Number 4 is prompt diligently. What does that mean, prompting our stakeholders? We need to guide our stakeholders in the direction that we want to get us the information that we need, to encourage them to talk more or less. How do we do that? How do we encourage stakeholders to talk? Well, one way is just to be direct. Can you be more specific? You can ask them. Another way is just to assume there's more. So if they talk about a requirement, I mean, let's talk about my cat. I say I have a cat, and the interviewer says, "What else?" Well, he's brown. What else? Well, he has very interesting green and brown eyes. What else? Okay, so it assumes there's more. That's a really great way to get stakeholders to keep talking. And empathy. I can see how that's difficult. When you empathize with somebody, they feel comfortable. It encourages them to keep going, keep talking. Nonverbal, nodding your head. That's all you need to do. Keep nodding your head. Eye contact. And saying their name. For those 85% of multitaskers, I put myself there. I think we can all put ourselves there. We're all multitasking these days. But when somebody says our name, we connect with that. We resonate with that. We're plugged in. That'll encourage us to talk more. And what else can I say? Here's some more tips. Repeat their statement, but as a question. So if your stakeholder says, the current system doesn't have any reports, you can just ask it as a question. The current system doesn't have any reports? And then they'll talk more. Or you can match them. You can recognize their tone. If they get quite upset about something, they say the current system doesn't have any reports. You can say, the current system doesn't have any reports? And now you're matching them. You're resonating with them, developing that comfort and trust. And the 5 whys, it's a very popular technique in business analysis and other circles. And it's only to say, once they say something, you just say, why is that? And then the stakeholder talks more, and you say, oh, why did that happen? And then you keep drilling down. And they call it the 5 whys because once you get to the 5th why, maybe you've heard enough and know enough about that requirement to be useful, or that step or that item of information. And the last one, probably my favorite, is using silence as a strategy. Because if I'm talking, then they aren't. And I want them to talk. Okay? Maybe initially it feels a little bit uncomfortable to both of you because you have this silence hanging in the air. And stakeholders might get a little bit uncomfortable, start fidgeting a little bit. But then they begin filling up the air with information because they don't like empty air. This is a really wonderful technique. Silence as a strategy. What if our stakeholders talk too much? We love it when stakeholders give us information. This is great. This is why we're in the meeting. But sometimes we really need to move the meeting on, don't we? So we have 3 options. Number 1 is we can interrupt them with a compliment. And it looks like this. Ralph is talking. He made his point. I documented it. And he keeps talking because he's super excited about the topic. But it really is time to move the meeting forward. So here's what I say to Ralph. Ralph, you made an excellent point about how this system lacks important auditing features. And it reminds me that we haven't yet talked about reporting. And then I transition. Okay? I actually was giving some presentations in Europe this summer, in Amsterdam and Paris. And it was a workshop. So the participants actually used these techniques in practice. And some of them didn't even know that they were being interrupted because they were interrupted with a compliment. So number 2 is we can also summarize their point, thank them, and then transition. And number 3 is we can put some items in the parking lot to discuss later. Ralph, you made an excellent point about how this system lacks important auditing features. I'm going to put that in the parking lot for now because we need to really do a deep dive into that, and it's a bigger discussion. So let's do that. And right now I'm going to move on to reporting requirements. Is that okay with you? And that last piece, when you say, is that okay with you? That's a very important part of respect and collaboration when you're working with stakeholders, and they appreciate it. Number 5, the last one, is get to know them. Get to know your stakeholders. Well, you can have all of the best techniques in the world, and none of them will be a substitute for actually getting to know your stakeholders. Because if you know them, you will know how they perform their best, what time, what method, in person, by teams, in small groups, in large groups. Are they verbal or visual? When is their busiest time at work? So you can arrange a different time to meet and get their feedback. Getting to know your stakeholders will be your number 1 success factor at work. And how do you get to know them? You ask them. Ask them what their working preferences are. Go to coffee with them. We can also make some good guesstimates as a starting point based on the kind of job that they do. What personalities do we assign to accountants versus sales? Introverts versus extroverts? Quiet versus talkative? It's a starting point. It's not everything, but it's a starting point. And we can ask other people about them. We can Google them. There's lots of different ways to get to know your stakeholders. And it all begins with asking them. So in summary, we want to set the mood and tone with your stakeholders, structure smartly to guide their focus. Number 3, be visual and appeal to how they absorb information. Number 4, prompt diligently to encourage or discourage discussion. And number 5, most important one, is get to know your stakeholders. So you don't have to walk that tightrope alone, and you can walk with your stakeholders instead. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any further questions. We are now going to move into the Q&A period.